Captain Alina Voss stood on the observation deck of the UES Prometheus, watching the stars drift past like scattered diamonds against black velvet. For 300 years, humanity had been part of the Galactic Alliance, a coalition of 17 species that promised peace, protection, and prosperity across the known universe. Alina had believed in that promise. She had dedicated her entire life to serving that ideal. But tonight, everything she believed in was about to shatter into a million pieces. The message came through at exactly 0300 hours standard Earth time. Alina was not supposed to see it. Nobody on Earth was supposed to see it. But Lieutenant Marcus Chen, a communications specialist with a gift for finding things that others wanted hidden, had intercepted something that would change the course of human history forever. He stood before Alina now, his face pale, his hands trembling as he held the datapad. "Captain, you need to see this," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I found it buried in the Alliance's encrypted channels. They never expected anyone to break through their security protocols, but I did. I wish I hadn't." Alina took the datapad and began reading. With each word her heart grew colder. The document was titled Protocol Silence, and it detailed a plan that had been in motion for over 50 years. The Galactic Alliance, the organization that humanity had trusted with its future, had been systematically stealing Earth's resources. They had been taking genetic samples from human populations without consent. They had been studying human biology, human psychology, and human technology. But the worst part was what they planned to do next. According to the document, Earth was scheduled for what the Alliance called peaceful retirement within the next decade. The Alien Council had decided that humans were becoming too advanced, too ambitious, and too dangerous to their carefully maintained order. They planned to introduce a biological agent into Earth's atmosphere that would slowly reduce human fertility over 3 generations. Within 100 years, humanity would simply fade away, and the Alliance would claim Earth's resources for themselves. Alina felt a rage building inside her that she had never experienced before. Humanity had given everything to the Alliance. They had shared their technology, their culture, and their trust. They had sent their sons and daughters to fight in Alliance wars. They had welcomed alien ambassadors into their cities and homes. And all along, the Alliance had been planning their extinction. "How many others know about this?" Alina asked, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "Just us for now," Marcus replied. "But Captain, there's more. The document mentions that there are Alliance spies embedded in every major Earth institution. They have been monitoring us, reporting on our progress, and ensuring that we remain unaware of their true intentions." Alina walked to the window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Alliance Council was sitting in their comfortable chambers, discussing the fate of her species like they were deciding what to have for dinner. They saw humans as nothing more than a useful tool that had outlived its purpose. They underestimated what humans were capable of when pushed into a corner. "We need to get this information to Earth Command," Alina said finally. "But we cannot use any official channels. The spies would intercept it before it reached anyone who could act on it." Marcus nodded. "I have an idea, Captain. My brother works on the lunar mining colony. It's a small operation, largely ignored by the Alliance because they don't consider it strategically important. We could route the message through their communication array. It's old technology, so old that the Alliance probably doesn't even monitor it anymore." Alina considered the plan. It was risky, but it was their best option. "To do it," she said. "And Marcus, make sure everyone on this ship understands what is at stake. From this moment on, we trust no one except our own." The next few hours were filled with careful planning and quiet preparation. Alina gathered her most trusted officers and shared the terrible truth with them. Some wept, others raged, but all of them understood that they now carried the weight of humanity's survival on their shoulders. Meanwhile on Earth, the message was received by Admiral James Morrison, a veteran of 3 Alliance campaigns who had long harbored suspicions about their alien partners. When he read the contents of Protocol Silence, his suspicions were confirmed in the most devastating way possible. He immediately contacted the heads of Earth's major nations through secure, human-only channels. The emergency meeting took place in an underground bunker that had been built during the Third World War. Long before humanity had made contact with alien life, the leaders of Earth sat around a table, reading the same document that had shattered Alina's faith. President Chen of the Eastern Coalition slammed his fist on the table. Prime Minister Williams of the Western Federation wiped tears from her eyes. Chancellor Mueller of the European states stared at the words in disbelief. "They have been playing us for fools," President Chen said bitterly. 300 years of cooperation, and this is how they repay us." "The question is not about betrayal," Admiral Morrison replied. "The question is what we do now. If we confront the Alliance openly, they will simply accelerate their plans. They have the technology and the numbers to crush us in open warfare." Prime Minister Williams leaned forward. "Then we don't fight them openly. Humans have always been survivors. We survived ice ages, plagues, and wars that should have destroyed us. We survived because we adapted, because we refused to give up, and because we fought smarter than our enemies expected." The leaders began to formulate a plan. They would pretend that nothing had changed. They would smile at the Alliance ambassadors and continue to participate in Alliance activities. but behind the scenes they would prepare. They would build secret shipyards hidden in asteroid fields. They would develop new weapons based on technology they had never shared with their so-called allies. They would train a new generation of soldiers who understood that the survival of their species depended on their courage and sacrifice. The war would not begin with a single battle. It would begin with silence. Earth would declare war on the silence that the Alliance had imposed upon them, the silence that was meant to be their death sentence. And when the time was right, humanity would show the galaxy that they were not a species to be quietly eliminated. They were a species that would fight for their existence with every breath, every drop of blood, and every ounce of their indomitable spirit. Elena Voss stood on the observation deck once more, but this time she was not watching the stars with wonder. She was watching them with determination. Somewhere among those distant lights were enemies who thought they had already won. They had no idea that humanity was about to prove them terribly, magnificently wrong. The first moves had been made. The pieces were being set upon the board, and soon, the galaxy would learn what happened when you betrayed the trust of a species that had crawled out of caves and reached for the stars through sheer will alone. The Alliance had made a grave mistake. They had forgotten that humans did not know how to surrender. They only knew how to fight. 5 years had passed since the discovery of protocol silence, and Earth had transformed in ways that the galaxy could never imagine. On the surface, everything appeared normal. Human diplomats continued to attend Alliance Council meetings with practiced smiles. Human merchants traded goods at alien space stations. Human tourists visited alien worlds and marveled at their wonders. But beneath this mask of normality, a storm was brewing. Deep within the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, humanity had constructed something extraordinary. The installation was called Project Phoenix, and it represented the combined genius of every scientist, engineer, and military strategist on Earth. Admiral Morrison, now the commander of Earth's Secret Defense Initiative, walked through the massive, underground facility with General Sofia Rodriguez by his side. Around them, thousands of workers moved with purpose, constructing ships unlike anything the Alliance had ever seen. The Valkyrie-class destroyers will be ready within 6 months, General Rodriguez reported, her voice filled with quiet pride. Each ship carries weapon systems that our Alliance friends have never encountered. We reverse-engineered their technology and improved upon it in ways they never thought possible. Morrison nodded, examining the sleek lines of the nearest ship. The Alliance had always underestimated human innovation. They saw humans as clever but ultimately limited. They failed to understand that humans had a gift for taking existing technology and pushing it beyond its original boundaries. Where the Alliance saw limitations, humans saw opportunities. In another section of the facility, Dr. Sarah Kim was leading a team of biologists in developing a counteragent to the fertility weapon that the Alliance had planned to use against humanity. Her team had worked around the clock for years, analyzing the biological agent described in Protocol Silence and creating a vaccine that would protect future generations. It was delicate, dangerous work, but Dr. Kim approached it with the same determination that had driven her ancestors to cure diseases that once seemed impossible to defeat. The vaccine distribution network is almost complete, Dr. Kim explained to Morrison during his inspection. We have established secret clinics in every major city on Earth. Within 2 years, every human being will be protected without the Alliance ever knowing. Morrison smiled for the first time in weeks. Humanity was not just preparing to fight, they were preparing to survive no matter what happened. This was the human way, to plan for every possibility, to refuse to accept defeat even when facing overwhelming odds. Meanwhile, Captain Elena Voss had taken on a new mission. She now commanded a special operations unit that worked behind enemy lines, gathering intelligence and building relationships with alien species who were not entirely loyal to the Alliance. She had discovered that humanity was not the only species that the Alliance had wronged. The Kreth, a reptilian race known for their warrior traditions, had been systematically denied representation on the Council despite their contributions to Alliance security. The Velenor, a peaceful species of telepaths, had been forced to use their gifts to spy on other races against their will. The Moldari silicon-based beings from the Outer Rim had watched helplessly as the Alliance stripped their homeworld of rare minerals. Elena met with representatives of these species in secret locations across the galaxy. She shared evidence of the Alliance's true nature and found willing ears. The Council had made many enemies over the centuries, and those enemies were now listening to what humanity had to say. On a remote moon in the Centauri system, Elena sat across from General Krathner of the Kreth military. The massive reptilian warrior studied her with his yellow eyes, his scaled face unreadable. "You ask us to risk everything," Krathner said, his voice like gravel scraping against stone. "The Alliance is powerful. They have crushed rebellions before. They have crushed rebellions of single species," Elena replied. "They have never faced a unified front of races who understand that their survival depends on standing together. The Alliance controls through division. They make each species believe they are alone, but we are not alone. General, none of us are." Krathner considered her words. In his long life he had seen many species try to resist the Alliance. All had failed. But there was something different about these humans. They had a fire in their eyes that he recognized, the fire of a warrior who refuses to accept defeat. It was the same fire that burned in the hearts of his own people. The Kreth will fight, Krathaner declared, but we will not follow blindly. Your people must prove themselves worthy of our alliance. Alina extended her hand in the human gesture of agreement. We will, General, when the time comes you will see what humans are capable of. Back on Earth, the final preparations were being made for what would become known as the Great Awakening. This was the moment when humanity would reveal to the galaxy that they knew the truth and that they would not accept extinction quietly. The plan was bold and dangerous. Every human ship in the galaxy would simultaneously broadcast a message exposing the Alliance's crimes. At the same moment, the secret fleet at Project Phoenix would emerge and take position around Earth's solar system. And on distant worlds, humanity's new allies would add their voices to the chorus of accusation. The date was set for the anniversary of humanity's first contact with alien life, a symbolic choice that carried deep meaning. 300 years ago, humans had looked up at the stars and hoped to find friends among them. They had found something else entirely, but hope was not dead. It had simply transformed into something stronger, something fiercer, something that the Alliance had never encountered before. In the final days before the Great Awakening, Admiral Morrison addressed the commanders who would lead humanity's secret fleet. They gathered in the command center of Project Phoenix, men and women from every nation on Earth, united by a common purpose. In a few days, we will show the galaxy who we really are, Morrison said, his voice echoing through the chamber. We are not victims. We are not a species waiting to be eliminated. We are humanity, and we have crawled through fire and darkness to reach this moment. Our enemies believe they know us. They have studied us, categorized us, and dismissed us. But they have made a fatal error. They have never seen what we become when everything we love is threatened. They are about to learn. The commanders responded with silent determination. Each of them understood the weight of what was coming. Some of them might not survive the battles ahead, but they also understood that their sacrifice would ensure that future generations would live free from the shadow of alien manipulation. Alina Voss, watching the address through a secure channel from her position in the outer territories, felt a profound sense of unity with her fellow humans. Across the vastness of space, millions of people were preparing to make their stand. Scientists, soldiers, diplomats, and ordinary citizens were all playing their parts in a plan that would determine whether humanity would continue to exist. She thought about her grandmother, who had told her stories about the early days of space exploration, when humans had dreamed of peaceful cooperation with alien civilizations. That dream had been beautiful, but it had also been naive. The universe was not a place where trust could be given freely. It had to be earned and protected with vigilance. Humanity had learned this lesson the hard way, but they had learned it nonetheless. The stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the drama unfolding among the tiny creatures who called them home. But those tiny creatures were about to make their presence known in ways that the galaxy would never forget. The countdown had begun, and when it reached 0, nothing would ever be the same again. The Great Awakening arrived on a morning that seemed like any other. Across the galaxy, Alliance officials went about their daily routines, confident in their power and secure in their secrets. They had no idea that in precisely 12 hours, their carefully constructed empire of lies would begin to crumble. High Counselor Zethavel of the Varani species sat in the Grand Chamber of the Alliance headquarters, reviewing reports from various sectors. The Varani were the dominant force in the Alliance. Tall beings with silver skin and eyes that held the cold intelligence of ancient predators. They had guided the Alliance for millennia, carefully managing the rise and fall of lesser species according to their own design. Humanity had been just another project, a resource to be exploited and eventually discarded. Zethavel had personally approved Protocol Silence, seeing it as nothing more than routine maintenance of galactic order. At exactly 1200 hours, Galactic Standard Time, every screen, every communication device, and every broadcast system in Alliance space flickered. For a moment Zethavel thought it was a technical malfunction. Then a human face appeared on every display. A woman with dark hair and eyes that burned with righteous fury. It was Captain Alina Voss, and she was about to deliver a message that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization. People of the galaxy, we are humanity, Alina began. Her voice transmitted across countless light years in an instant. For 300 years we believed in the promise of the Galactic Alliance. We believed in cooperation, in mutual respect, and in a shared future among the stars. Today, we reveal the truth that the Alliance is hidden from you all. Across Alliance space, billions of beings stopped what they were doing and listened. The documents appeared on their screens, the evidence of Protocol Silence laid bare for everyone to see. They saw the plans for human extinction. They saw records of similar programs targeting other species in the past. They saw the cold calculations of the Council, treating entire civilizations as nothing more than numbers on a spreadsheet. The Alliance does not protect you, Alina continued. It controls you. It decides which species will prosper and which will fade into extinction. Today, humanity rejects this false order. Today, We declare that we will not go quietly into the night, and we call upon every species who has suffered under Alliance rule to join us in building something better." Zethavel watched the broadcast with growing horror. Somehow, impossibly, the humans had discovered the truth. Even worse, they were exposing it to the entire galaxy. He reached for the communication panel to order an immediate military response, but before he could give the command, alarms began blaring throughout the headquarters. "High Counselor," an aide reported, panic evident in his voice. "Unknown vessels have emerged from hyperspace at coordinates across Alliance territory. Hundreds of them. They are broadcasting human identification codes." The hidden fleet of Project Phoenix had revealed itself. Ships that should not exist, built with technology that the Alliance had never seen, now held strategic positions around key Alliance installations. But they were not attacking, not yet. They were waiting, demonstrating that humanity was no longer the defenseless species the Council had assumed. On Earth, Admiral Morrison watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The Alliance now faced an impossible choice. They could attack the human fleet and prove to the galaxy that everything Elena had said was true, or they could attempt to negotiate, buying humanity the time they needed to strengthen their position. But the plan did not end with the revelation. Across the galaxy, the allies that Elena had cultivated over the past 5 years began to act. General Krathena led a fleet of Kreth warships to defend the human vessels, announcing that the Kreth would no longer serve an alliance that treated its members as disposable resources. The Velenor broadcast a collective message, the psychic voice of an entire species declaring their support for humanity's cause. The Moldari began shutting down the mining operations that had been exploiting their world, cutting off vital resources to Alliance factories. Zethavel found himself facing a crisis unlike anything in Alliance history. The carefully maintained order was falling apart. Species that had been loyal for centuries were now questioning everything they had been told. Military commanders were hesitating to follow orders, uncertain whether their actions would be justified or condemned by history. An emergency session of the Alliance Council was called, but it quickly dissolved into chaos. Representatives of the accused species demanded answers. Others called for immediate military action against humanity. Some proposed opening negotiations to prevent further dissolution of the Alliance. Through it all, Zethavel struggled to maintain control, but control was slipping away like water through his fingers. "We must destroy the human fleet before they gain more support," Commander Vorinth of the Alliance military argued. "Show the galaxy that resistance is futile, and prove everything they claimed about us." Representative Malin of the neutral Paxer species countered. "We would be confirming our guilt to every system in the galaxy." Elena watched the chaos unfold from the bridge of the UES Prometheus, now leading the combined human Kreth fleet near the Alliance border. She had expected the Council to fracture under pressure, and they had not disappointed her. The Alliance's greatest weakness was not its military or its technology. It was the lie at its core, the pretense of unity that crumbled when exposed to truth. But Elena also knew that desperation made enemies dangerous. The Varani had controlled the galaxy for too long to surrender their power without a fight. Eventually, they would strike, and when they did, humanity needed to be ready. Her tactical officer, Lieutenant Commander James Wright, reported incoming Alliance vessels. A battle group of 50 ships was approaching their position, the largest concentration of Alliance military power seen in decades. At its head was the flagship of the Varani fleet, the Eternal Dominion, commanded by Admiral Zir, the most feared military commander in Alliance history. "All ships prepare for engagement," Elena ordered, her voice calm despite the tension in her chest. "Signal General Krathena to bring his fleet to flanking position, and tell our people to remember what they are fighting for." The first shots of the war were fired at 1847 hours Galactic Standard Time. Alliance vessels launched precision strikes at human ships, expecting their superior numbers and experience to quickly overwhelm the inexperienced human fleet. What they found instead was a force that had prepared for this moment for half a decade. The Valkyrie-class destroyers proved more than worthy of their name. Their weapons cut through Alliance shields with unexpected efficiency, the result of years of secret development based on stolen and improved alien technology. Human pilots flew with a ferocity that startled their opponents, accepting incredible risks to protect their fellowships. The Kreth warriors, natural fighters who had longed for an honorable battle, tore into the Alliance flanks with savage joy. Within 2 hours, the battle that was supposed to demonstrate Alliance superiority had turned into a humiliating defeat. The Eternal Dominion retreated with heavy damage, leaving behind a debris field of destroyed vessels. Admiral Zareth, who had never lost a major engagement in his career, transmitted his surrender to the human fleet with barely concealed rage. Elena accepted the surrender with grace, but without illusion. This was only the first battle of what would be a long war. The Alliance still controlled vast territories and commanded enormous resources. They would regroup, adapt, and attack again. But this victory had accomplished something crucial. It had proven that humanity could fight and win. It had shown the galaxy that the Alliance was not invincible. That night, Alina received messages of congratulation from allies across the galaxy, but the message that meant the most came from Earth itself, from the leaders who had trusted her with this impossible mission. President Chen's words were simple but profound. "You have given our people hope. Now we must work to deserve that hope." The war for survival had truly begun, and humanity had announced its presence on the galactic stage in the most dramatic way possible. They were no longer a species waiting for permission to exist. They were warriors, and they would fight until the very end. The months following the first battle brought both triumph and tragedy. What began as a single confrontation evolved into a war that spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Systems that had been loyal to the Alliance for centuries suddenly found themselves questioning old allegiances. Species that had never considered resistance now looked at humanity's example and wondered if they too could break free from the Council's control. Admiral Morrison established a command center on the moon of Titan, transforming the cold satellite into the nerve center of humanity's war effort. From here, he coordinated operations across multiple fronts, working with allies from a dozen different species. The old divisions that had once separated human nations had completely disappeared. German engineers worked alongside Chinese scientists. American soldiers trained with Russian pilots. Brazilian diplomats negotiated with alien representatives while Indian strategists planned their next moves. Humanity had finally achieved the unity it had always dreamed of. Brought together not by choice but by necessity. But the alliance was far from defeated. High Counselor Zethavel, humiliated by the initial losses, had consolidated power among the remaining loyalist species. He implemented brutal measures to crush any internal dissent, making examples of worlds that showed sympathy for the human cause. Entire cities were bombarded from orbit. Populations were displaced and imprisoned. The mask of benevolent governance had been torn away, revealing the iron fist that had always lurked beneath the velvet glove. On the planet Vid, a lush agricultural world that supplied food to dozens of Alliance systems. A resistance movement led by the local population was brutally suppressed. Images of the massacre spread across the galaxy, broadcast by human ships that had penetrated Alliance communication networks. Each atrocity only strengthened the resolve of those who opposed the Council and convinced more fence-sitters to join the rebellion. Captain Elena Voss found herself at the center of increasingly dangerous missions. Her reputation had grown to legendary proportions among both allies and enemies. To the oppressed species of the galaxy, she was a symbol of hope. To the Alliance, she was a target that needed to be eliminated at any cost. During a reconnaissance mission in the Arcturus sector, Elena's ship was ambushed by a specialized Alliance hunting squad. The Prometheus took heavy damage, and for hours the crew fought to survive against overwhelming odds. Emergency repairs were conducted under fire. Wounded sailors continued working at their stations. The ship's cook, a grandmother from New Zealand named Margaret Chen, took over a weapon station when its operator was killed, fighting with a ferocity that would have surprised anyone who only knew her for her excellent lamb stew. When reinforcements finally arrived, the Prometheus was barely holding together, but it had survived. Alina personally visited every wounded crew member in the medical bay, remembering their names, their families, their sacrifices. This was what the war was really about, not grand strategies or political declarations, but ordinary people doing extraordinary things because they refused to accept extinction. Meanwhile, Dr. Sarah Kim's vaccination program had achieved its goal. Every human being on Earth and in the colonies had been protected against the biological weapon that the Alliance had planned to use. But Dr. Kim did not stop there. She had begun working on medical technologies that could help humanity's allies as well, sharing her knowledge freely with species who had been denied access to advanced healthcare by the Alliance. This generosity created bonds of loyalty that no political alliance could match. General Krathner and his Kreth warriors had become inseparable from the human forces. The reptilian general had developed a deep respect for human fighting spirit, and his own people had found kindred souls in these small, fragile beings who fought like demons when defending their homes. A new tradition emerged where Kreth warriors would take human names as battle honors, and human soldiers would learn the ancient Kreth war songs that had been sung for thousands of years. The Velina telepaths provided intelligence that proved invaluable in predicting Alliance movements. Their ability to sense emotional patterns across vast distances allowed the rebellion to anticipate enemy strategies before they were implemented. But the Velinor were not simply tools of war. They used their gifts to heal the psychological wounds that combat inflicted, helping traumatized soldiers find peace and purpose again. As the war entered its second year, a critical decision had to be made. The Alliance had begun constructing a massive weapon platform in the Omega Nebula, a station capable of destroying entire planets from across the galaxy. If it became operational, the rebellion would face a threat against which there was no defense. The choice was clear but terrifying. They had to destroy the weapon before it was completed, even if it meant sacrificing everything they had built. Admiral Morrison called a council of war that brought together representatives from every species that had joined the rebellion. The debate lasted for 3 days. Some argued for a cautious approach, for waiting until they had gathered more strength. Others insisted that delay would only give the Alliance time to complete their doomsday weapon. In the end, it was a young human pilot named Sarah Torres who spoke the words that decided the matter. "My grandfather escaped from persecution on Earth when he was a child," she said. "Standing before leaders who commanded billions of soldiers, he always told me that there are moments in history when you have to risk everything or lose everything. This is one of those moments. If we wait, we die. If we fight, we might die. But at least we die on our feet, not on our knees." The Council voted to attack. Every available ship was called to assemble at the staging point near the Velenor homeworld. It would be the largest fleet action in galactic history, a desperate gamble that would either end the Alliance's threat forever, or result in the complete destruction of the rebellion. Alina Voss was given command of the assault force, a responsibility that weighed heavily on her shoulders. She spent the night before the attack alone in her quarters, looking at photographs of her family, of friends she had lost, of the planet Earth that she was fighting to protect. She thought about all the people who were counting on her, all the species who had placed their trust in human leadership. The burden was almost unbearable, but she refused to let it break her. At dawn, the fleet departed for the Omega Nebula. Thousands of ships from a dozen species moved through hyperspace toward their destiny. Human destroyers flew alongside Kreth battlecruisers. Velenor support vessels maintained psychic links between the scattered formations. Moldari engineering ships stood ready to repair damage in the heat of battle. They were a motley collection of races who had nothing in common except a shared desire for freedom and a willingness to fight for it. As the fleet emerged from hyperspace and the massive Alliance weapon platform came into view, Elena took a deep breath and opened a channel to all ships. Her voice carried across the void to every soldier, every crew member, every being who had chosen to stand against tyranny. "Today we fight not just for our own survival," she said, "but for the right of every species to determine its own destiny. The Alliance believes that some lives are worth more than others, that some species can be discarded when they become inconvenient. We reject that belief. We fight for a galaxy where every being has value, where cooperation is based on respect, and where no council can decide who lives and who dies. Whatever happens today, remember that we did not start this war, but we will finish it." The fleet surged forward, and the final battle for the future of the galaxy began. The Battle of Omega Nebula would be remembered for millennia as the moment when the old order of the galaxy finally collapsed. Alliance defenders fought with the desperation of those who knew that failure meant the end of their dominance. Rebel forces attacked with the courage of those who knew that failure meant extinction. The space around the massive weapon platform became a chaotic maelstrom of energy beams, exploding ships, and dying screams transmitted across communication channels. Alina commanded from the bridge of the newly repaired Prometheus, her mind racing to adapt to the constantly changing battlefield. The Alliance had concentrated their remaining naval power here, forming a defensive ring around their ultimate weapon that seemed impenetrable. For every rebel ship that broke through, 3 were destroyed. The losses were staggering, and for a terrible moment, Alina feared that they had made a fatal miscalculation. Then General Krathon executed a maneuver that would be studied in military academies for centuries to come. His Kreth battlecruisers dove directly toward the heart of the Alliance formation, absorbing incredible punishment but drawing the enemy's attention. In the chaos that followed, a small squadron of human stealth vessels slipped through the gaps in the defensive line. These ships, designed specifically for this mission, carried specially trained soldiers who would attempt to board the weapon platform and destroy it from within. Leading the boarding team was Lieutenant Commander Marcus Chen, the same communications specialist who had first discovered Protocol Silence so many years ago. He had trained relentlessly for this moment, knowing that his skills at penetrating enemy systems would be crucial. As the boarding pods attached to the platform's hull and the soldiers burned their way inside, Marcus felt a strange calm settle over him. This was his purpose. The reason fate had chosen him to intercept that fateful message. The interior of the weapon platform was a maze of corridors and chambers, defended by Alliance security forces who fought with fanatical determination. Human soldiers fell, but others stepped over their bodies and continued forward. They fought room by room, level by level, climbing toward the central control core where the platform's main reactor could be overloaded. Marcus reached the control room after what felt like an eternity of combat. Only 4 members of his original 30-person team remained alive. The Alliance technicians inside surrendered immediately, recognizing that resistance was pointless. Marcus approached the main console and began the sequence that would trigger a catastrophic overload. "How long do we have?" one of his teammates asked. 5 minutes, Marcus replied. "Maybe less." They ran through corridors filled with smoke and debris, past fallen friends and enemies, toward the docking bay where their pods might still be functional. Behind them, the reactor began its final countdown, energy building toward an explosion that would vaporize everything within 1,000 kilometers. They almost made it. The pods launched with seconds to spare, accelerating away from the platform just as the first explosions began to tear it apart. Marcus watched through the viewport as the weapon that would have destroyed worlds consumed itself in a fireball that briefly outshone the surrounding stars. He allowed himself a small smile before exhaustion claimed him outside. The destruction of the weapon platform broke the spirit of the Alliance defenders. Some ships surrendered. Others attempted to flee into hyperspace. A few fought to the death rather than accept the new reality. But the outcome was no longer in doubt. The rebellion had won. On the Alliance capital world, High Counselor Zethavel watched the battlefields with growing horror. Everything he had built, everything his ancestors had created, was crumbling around him. He considered escape, but where could he go? The species that had once obeyed the Council now celebrated its defeat. The military that had enforced his will now lay shattered in the void. He was the last ruler of an empire that no longer existed. When human and allied forces arrived to take him into custody, Zethavel offered no resistance. He was led away in silence, his silver skin pale, his ancient eyes empty of the arrogance that had once filled them. He would spend the rest of his long life in confinement, reflecting on the decisions that had brought him to this end. The aftermath of the war brought challenges that sometimes seemed as difficult as the conflict itself. Rebuilding shattered worlds, helping displaced populations return home, establishing new systems of governance that would prevent the abuses of the old alliance. Alina Voss, now holding the title of Admiral, worked tirelessly to bring together the diverse species who had fought alongside humanity. A new organization rose from the ashes of the old. They called it the Federation of Free Worlds, and its founding charter was written with the lessons of the past clearly in mind. No single species would dominate. All decisions would require broad consensus. Military force could only be used defensively, never for conquest or control. Transparent communication would prevent the secrets that had nearly destroyed humanity from ever taking root again. Admiral Morrison lived long enough to see the first assembly of the Federation Council, where representatives from 23 species gathered to begin building a new galactic community. Humans were respected members of this body, but they did not seek to lead it. They had learned that power shared was more sustainable than power hoarded, that trust built was more valuable than trust betrayed years later. Alina stood in a memorial garden on Earth, looking at the names of those who had fallen during the war. So many names, so many stories cut short, so many families who had lost loved ones. She touched the cold stone that bore the name of Margaret Chen, the grandmother who had fought at a weapons station to save her ship. Beside it was the name of Sarah Torres, the young pilot whose words had rallied the rebellion, lost during the assault on the weapon platform. Was it worth it? A young cadet asked, standing beside her. Alina considered the question carefully. The war had cost so much. Millions of lives from dozens of species, entire worlds scarred by conflict, a trauma that would echo through generations. But she also thought about what would have happened if humanity had remained silent, if they had simply accepted their fate. Ask the children who will grow up free, Alina replied. Ask the species who now govern themselves instead of serving masters. Ask the generations yet to be born who will never know the fear of extinction. They will tell you whether it was worth it. The sun set over the memorial garden, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Somewhere among the stars, new ships carried explorers and merchants on journeys of discovery and trade. The galaxy was not perfect, and new challenges arose with each passing year. But the fundamental character of interstellar civilization had changed. Species now approached each other with respect rather than suspicion. Cooperation was genuine rather than enforced. And when disagreements arose, they were resolved through dialogue rather than domination. Humanity had declared war on silence, on the silence that was meant to be their death sentence. They had won that war not through brutality or conquest, but through unity, determination, and an unshakable refusal to accept injustice. The stars still shone as they always had, indifferent to the creatures below. But those creatures had proven that even in an indifferent universe, compassion and courage could triumph over cruelty and fear. Alina looked up at those distant stars and made a silent promise to all those who had sacrificed everything. Their deaths would not be in vain. The future they had fought for would be protected. And if any power in the galaxy ever again threatened the freedom that had been so dearly purchased, humanity would stand ready to defend it. Some species submitted to fate. Humanity chose to shape it, and that simple difference had changed everything.